All right, thank you, Roshan. And thank you everyone for being here for our talk. We realize that this is the final talk of the final session of the symposium, so we do appreciate your presence. And we hope that several people out there were able to stop by yesterday for our Somnium demo. But don't worry if not, because after this we will be meeting in hubs and we will have our video playthroughs available so you can see in action some of what we'll be discussing here. So I am Andy Head, and I am an assistant professor here at RIT, and I teach theater arts for both RIT and NTID in the performing arts programs. My background is in acting and in directing, and for Somnium, I served as the production manager. Omen?
So I'm Omen Said. I had the pleasure of conceiving and writing and directing Somnium. And my background is in physical theater, so telling stories with action, with the body. And I've worked as an actor and director and writer on a number of projects.
So we do want to emphasize from the very beginning of this talk that we are theater people. We come from a very traditional theater background of real live actors on a stage before a real live audience. And so in this creative process of developing and reimagining Somnium, we really broke out of our comfort zone and tried to branch out and find new and different ways to create an exciting and possibly new form of theater. I also want to give you a little bit of background and context on the performing arts at RIT. And so the programs here really strive to achieve the RIT brand. And what I mean by that is working at the intersection of art and technology. And from a theater perspective, seeing how we can harness whatever certain form of cutting edge tech we're looking into and using that to push the audience's experience forward, to create something unique or perhaps different that the audience has never experienced before. And that brings us to Somnium. Omen?
So Somnium, which just means dream in Latin, began its life in 2016 as a fringe festival piece at the Rochester Fringe Festival. Here are some images of it. You can see that it's 5 actors on a condensed wooden stage holding some objects. So it's done in a style called object manipulation, where the actors use objects and their bodies to create these series of dynamic images. It is as low tech as theater can possibly be. I think that the most advanced piece of technology we had in that show was a flashlight. Um, it capitalizes on the imaginations of the actors in terms of creating the images and the imaginations of the audience in terms of interpreting these images. And we employed this methodology of adaptation in theater, which is very common, but we wanted to choose something that was unusual for a source material. So we actually had the actors record their dreams over a couple of weeks in a dream journal. And then we used those as the source material for developing this story. And the through line that we created for a plot was a story of a group of scientists who invent a vessel which can travel into the collective dream space of humanity. And so this is how we did it. And sort of the idea with this stage is the smaller the real space, the more epic the dramatic space is. And so when Andy asked me to come and direct this show at RIT in 2020, we thought, great, we're going to do essentially a reproduction of this using a new group of actors, RIT students who can record their own dreams. So it'll be all different, but this is the format. But then, of course, COVID happened.
So much like the last presentation, we were in the middle of a creative process, and then the pandemic hit, and all theater arts across the entire world were basically halted, because what is at the heart of theater is also what's at the heart of allowing the virus to spread. So we started finding ourselves facing challenges and questioning, should Somnium go forward? Should we postpone it and just delay until this is all over, whenever that may be? Should we explore Somnium in a different way? At that time, we had no idea of what that might even look like. But from a traditional theater perspective, we're looking at our performance space, which could hold 50 to 60 people, now holding only 5 to 6 people. And the method in which the show would be done on a small raised platform, which previously we had 5 actors on the stage, could now only have 1 actor on the stage. And also facing the unknowns of what would happen during the fall semester. Would RIT be closed down? And if our show was planning to happen on campus, how would that derail it? So our mindset, really, we were trying to reframe things to get out in front of the virus, and how could we preserve the show no matter what the virus threw at us. And so we started looking at, okay, what are some digital theater options, and how else might this production take place? And that also brought up a question of what is at the heart of theater, which is the audience-actor relationship, and how that feeds off of each other, and the dynamic feedback between what the performers are giving and what the audience is giving. So if Somnium is no longer live face-to-face, but is live online, does it lose anything? Is that necessary? Or if we took a pre-recorded route, what are some of the benefits or some of the pros and cons of that decision? And so in wrestling with all of these different challenges and questions, we did decide a very ambitious path to really take Somnium in a completely different direction, which I will let Omen talk more about.
Yeah, so what we ended up doing was creating a totally digital version. We incorporated elements of game design. We brought on a couple of other very important collaborators, Elizabeth Goins and Joe Geigel, who recommended using Unreal Engine to create this game. So what you see here are some images from what ended up being a hybrid game performance story. So there were all these three-dimensional environments, which we actually decided to put the audience in the hero role of this story. So it wasn't just that we were watching the story; you were actually a character. We endowed the audience with the character of Jesse Canis, who's an Air Force pilot and gets brought on by this group of scientists to actually pilot the ship. So you start out at the top left in your own living room, and all these objects have interactivity. And as you play through this story, there are spaces that you can explore. There are what appear to be live actors. We actually filmed them in front of a green screen, one by one, for COVID safety, and then imported those video files into the Unreal Engine. And what the result is this kind of lush, colorful environment. We incorporated elements of animation. So this squid tentacle thing that you see in the middle top, that's like a cut scene in the video game where you just cut to a video of it. And so it really is this interactive process. But we kept the story of this group of scientists who voyage into dream space.
And how did we arrive there? How did we make the great leap from a small physical performance piece into a completely virtual piece? Well, one of the first things that we realized is that we did not have all of the appropriate people on the team. And so we seemingly more than doubled our production team to include experts in fields where we, as traditional theater makers, didn't have that knowledge or the background or the skills to create a virtual Somnium. So on this current slide, you'll see above the line are some of the more traditional areas of theater design. And below the line are several areas where we realized that we had significant gaps that would need to be filled, and people who could lead those different areas of the team in order to help create this new Somnium that we were envisioning. And after the show was over, we went through and we counted how many different people worked on the production, and we totaled with 72. And only 7 of them were in the cast. And typically, if you think of a giant show, you think of a lot of actors on the stage and then the people supporting them. And in this case, it was quite the opposite. There were only a handful of actors, but behind the scenes, there were so many more people who needed to come on board to help develop the show and edit the show and bring that show to realization. And Omen's going to talk a little bit more about that design process.
So because we were working with such a such an unusual sci-fi story and so many different elements, we decided to give a unifying aesthetic to the piece. So we decided, because it was this sci-fi story, we wanted to go with the aesthetic of the classic 1950s sci-fi. So here you have some dime store novel covers that we used as research images. You can see this ship here on the right ended up being a similar kind of design to the actual Somnium in the story. We also wanted to kind of reference the very roots of science fiction and Jules Verne, and the grandfather of science fiction. So you see this famous scene in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea where the ship is attacked by a squid. We have a reference to that, which you can see brilliantly in our hubs room on display. We also wanted for the 3D designers to have a very clear aesthetic to go to. The design of the 1950s is so iconic. And it also, of course, gives us some wonderful costumes to play with. Oh, so the other thing that we did was look at images from modern day science facilities. So these are actually images of CERN. In the story, when the Higgs boson is discovered at CERN, that rips a hole in the space-time continuum, which allows the scientists to go into this dream space. So we looked at, what does CERN actually look like? And we realized it's a lot more colorful than we thought. And here are some of the wonderful costumes. We incorporated the bubble helmets, these tall boots, the blaster straps, and all this stuff that we knew that people would have fun designing and wearing, and that would present a sense of familiarity to the audience in this very kind of sometimes potentially chaotic story. So when we got into the rehearsal process, we had to do a lot of very innovative things. You can see in these pictures the green screen that we actually filmed the actors in front of. And so if there was a scene with 5 people, we would film it 5 separate times with 1 actor at a time. So what this means for the actors is, normally in a stage play, we would say, okay, go stage left and then speak to this person who's right here and then go touch this table. Okay, we didn't have any of that. So the actors, not only we had to develop a new terminology for staging based on the single camera, and the camera is also the audience, because every time the actor turns the camera, they're looking directly at you, the hero. They had to keep in mind, okay, if I'm speaking to the captain, then that person is here at 45 degrees from the camera. And then my workstation, which doesn't exist, is over here. And then over here at this angle is the porthole, which shows me outside the ship. I had to keep all of that in their minds for every single scene. And they did an amazing job of making it really seem like they were reacting to things in the space. We also did manage to have some elements of devised processes in here, but it was a lot more decentralized than what we would normally do for this process. So there were moments where, like with the choreography of the squid fight, we developed that. Dom, who played the guy with the spear there, he and I developed that sequence together. There were some writing sequences that we developed together. And in terms of all the digital design, all the students who worked on that had the ability to bring what they wanted into that process. Now, in a theater process, you can layer all of the elements. So you start with a bare stage, you can rehearse the actors on the bare stage, that's fine. If you can build half the set, great, use half the set. You have half the costumes, half the set, all this works. What Andy and I discovered is that in the digital sphere, in this working with Unreal, every element had to be finished before Elizabeth and Joe and Jan Carlos could actually start putting these things together. So as we kept saying, oh yeah, we almost have that, they were sort of panicking a little bit as the launch date got closer and closer, because they had to incorporate not only the 3D environments, but also the interactivity, the video components of the actors. So if there are 5 actors in a scene, that's potentially like 20 or 30 different individual clips that then had to be rearranged and edited together. There were captions that had to be synced up to those videos, interpreting videos, music and sound effects, animations, interactivity. So everything depended on everything else already being created. When we got to the point where we were going to launch, we actually decided to push it back a little bit because we needed more time. And some of the challenges that we encountered were, because we were using Unreal Engine in a way that it's not necessarily designed for, the engine was getting overloaded. We also realized that what we thought was going to be, just a little thing that you would download, ended up being 12 gigabytes, which is bigger than most people casually download. There were compatibility issues with software. It didn't work on any Macs. It also didn't really work as well on a standard PC. It worked better on like a gaming PC, which most of our intended audience didn't necessarily have access to. And all of these were discoveries for Andy and I. I kept thinking sort of like, wow, here we are. We've taken this voyage out into the unknown. But despite all of those challenges, what we discovered in the end was that when, if you want to go to the next slide, Andy, when the technique works, when the technique of putting this live filmed person in a 3D constructed environment, when that works, it's really spectacular. And because you have the ability to move around and see different elements, you really feel like you're there interacting with a real human being. And it's really exciting to see that come together. The other thing that was very pleasing to me was that all of the students who worked on it talked about feeling this sense of camaraderie with each other, even though they almost never physically were in the same room with each other. It was almost entirely over Zoom. So even though it was this very complex process, there was a sense of togetherness with it. And then there's the question of, you know, has anyone never done this exactly before? We don't know. And it seems like, you know, in theater, you are working with forms and everyone in theater always says, oh, we're doing something totally new. And almost never is that actually the case. And I really felt like, oh my gosh, we're doing something that no one has ever done, at least in this way. And I think that what was so exciting about that, it was just incorporating the work and the innovation of so many different collaborators, none of whom were in their comfort zones, because the theater people had no idea what was going on with the technology. And the digital people didn't necessarily know, have so much experience with how a theater process works. So
So where do we go from here? Well, as Omen started to hint at, perhaps the pandemic has forced us to discover a new form of theater. Since the very beginning of theater, it's been fighting for its survival, and that's especially true in the 20th century as new forms of entertainment such as radio and TV and movies came to be. Theater had to keep evolving and innovating and scrapping for its own little spot on the storytelling territory. And so what this form of digital theater or video game performance allows for is a completely immersive world where the audience can be in that world with the characters, which is difficult to replicate in traditional performance. It allows for the audience to be able to have autonomy on where they want to move and what they want to look at. And also it creates several different choose your own adventure options. So maybe the audience wants to choose path A or path B, and that will lead to different sort of outcomes. And so all of these things tie together into a more unique, personalized experience that that provides a different kind of audience engagement than theater has really done up to this point. So perhaps there will be a Somnium 3.0 that we continue to build upon the successes of Somnium 2.0. But that concludes our talk. So I'm gonna stop sharing the screen and see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Andy and Aman. So that was again like a wonderful presentation. And I think, yeah, COVID has also given us so many chances to become so creative and come up with like really innovative solutions. It also reminded me of the keynote talk as well, where like Terence was talking about how these challenges sometimes give us like, you know, make us come up with like really cool innovations. And yeah, I was just wondering, like, I think you briefly touched upon it, like what's next for Somnium? Like, will you continue in this sort of VR path, or like, do you still prefer to have your original kind of presentation style, or like what is next for Somnium? Yeah.
Well, when I first kind of designed Somnium as a show, the thing that was so exciting for me was that it doesn't have to just have one form. You know, the methodology of working with actors to record their dreams and then adapting from that could be done if it was done in a live, you know, small stage version. That can be done 1,000 times with 1,000 different casts. And I think that this is a new and exciting way of working on it. I would love to see there be some parallel tracks going. And I'm very interested in seeing if we can create a more fully realized VR version or even a more fully realized desktop version of Somnium in the future.